here today on the beautiful unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. We're very honored to be on their lands, and very appreciative to have Lillian with us here today. Lillian Howard, who's going to share her story of residential school, so that we have a better understanding of why reconciliation is so important and how each of us can be engaged in the process of reconciliation in our own way. I think it's really important to understand, you know, to hear the human story, so that we have a much better sense of what happened in our history. This is Linda Coe. She's our ASL interpreter. And we also have a woman coming after Lillian's finished. Her name is Kyla Hackett. She's coming from Reconciliation Canada to just invite you to tell you a little bit about the Walk for Reconciliation on Sunday. I'd also want to acknowledge our cook over, who is Nancy Lanthier, who is Nancy is our director of marketing, and she, you know, wanted to make all this food for you. So thank you so much, Nancy, for that.
Thanks for coming.
And so Lillian's going to speak, and I think she'll ask you if you have questions after. Won't you, Lillian? So enjoy.
I can see you all sitting down. Clashes, Nuu-chah-nulth, it's Mowachaht, Nuu-chah-nulth, Tlingit, Kwakwaka'wakw. My English name is Lillian Howard. My Mowachaht name is Nuu-chah-nulth, which means welcoming people on behalf of our Hotwe and Hakum. Those are chiefs and matriarchs. And I'd like to do two things. One, I would like to share my story. Two, I would like to talk about Vancouver becoming a reconciliation and why it's so important to tie in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Reconciliation Canada, because I'm very involved with all three. And I'm a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. 2 daughters, 2 granddaughters, and 3 great-granddaughters. I'll be 67 in November. I'm a fourth generation residential school survivor. I attended Christian residential school in the mid-50s, 56 to 58. And then from there, I went to a day school in my village in Nuu-chah-nulth, where Captain Cook landed in 1774 and later, 1778, Spaniards in 1774. Went to day school there, which was a whole lot better than the residential school. And when I was 14, I went to, we didn't have a high school, I went to Mission Indian Residential School. So, the Indian Residential School has impacted literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people across Canada for generations. My great-grandfather went, my grandfather, my grandparents, my parents, and me, and some of my siblings. So the colonial impacts created a lot of historical trauma for many families. We're still going through that. Many families, along with mine, are working on breaking cycles of violence, addressing addiction issues, and really working towards embarking on a healing journey, which is very, very challenging to do. It doesn't get any easier, no matter how many times you've addressed it, how many people you've talked to, whether it's family or a group of people you don't know. Sometimes I get really emotional, and then other times I'm able to sail through and just, okay, I'm carrying on, moving on. And it was because I know a couple of people in the room. Oh, I'm feeling a little vulnerable, probably a little safer. It's really important for people who invite people to talk about their residential school to create a safe environment. Without that safe environment, it's very triggering for us to talk about sexual abuse, to talk about being victims of sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and all kinds of abuses in the residential school. So I'm one of those people that went through that, one of the students that was sexually abused by a brother when I was 6 and 7 years old. And I wasn't the only one. In 1991, 92, the brother that had sexually abused me was charged for sexual assault and rape by a number of people. And yeah, he was actually sentenced. So up until that point, I, like many people, questioned, did it really happen? Or was, you know, because I had suppressed it for so long. And anytime the topic came up, I just turned away from it. It was just too painful. Because at 6 years old, I went from a very loving family to a very cold, dark place where people, adults, did not care. So I felt the essence of my being as a woman, as a human being, was violated so drastically and dramatically that it affected me for the rest of my life. At 17, because of the cycles of violence that is rampant in our communities as a result of being residential school students and experiences the many forms of violence from adults in these institutions, ended up being offenders. At 17, I was in a community, one of the reserves. I call her, when it's a reserve that's not so many good things are happening, I call it a reserve. And when there's a place that's got a village community, I call that a village. And this one happened to be a reserve with so much social ills that I understand it now, but I was gang raped at 17 in this community, this reserve. And the person that saved me was married to one of my first cousins. The person who saved me from being raped by the fourth guy saved me. Took me to his grandmother's, and she did a lot of brushing on me. She did a lot of work on me. Had she not done that, I think I probably would have become an alcoholic. And that issue, again, I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't start addressing that until I started doing presentations to Vancouver Police Department. And then at 49, working in Ottawa at the National Indian Brotherhood. Again, it's all related to the violence or communities. I was on my way home. I lived in a downtown area, really nice apartment. And I was dragged into an alley and beaten up so brutally and raped. At 49, I was already grown. And I thought that I wasn't going to make it. I was really fortunate that the police came around when they did, doing their patrolling in that area. Although it gets really quiet after a certain hour. You know, there's not very many people around. Pebble City, that was safe. Turned out it wasn't. And I managed to get away from the guy, got to the street. By that time my clothes were all ripped off and stuff, and he got up to me and continued to beat me and started raping me again when the police came. Grabbed him and arrested him. And I was the guy's fourth victim. And sadly, he was an Indigenous man from Mississauga. So that one was a brutal one. The police said that if they hadn't shown up, or if no one showed up, that I would like live and left for dead. Because it was so cold, it was the end of October 30th. So after that I went into I went into depression. And got a bit suicidal, or didn't get suicidal, but thoughts came through my mind from the time, it was familiar to what happened to me when I was 17. Just didn't feel worthy as a woman. I just felt like I was an object to be discarded. So I went into depression and started my healing journey. I started seeing counselors, therapists. Earlier, when I worked as a Nuu-chah-nulth tribal council as a co-chair, I did go through personal growth seminars, started some of my healing around some of the issues. And but it wasn't until the Truth and Reconciliation process that happened that I started finally getting to the core of what was eating at me all my life, and that was the residential school. And finding out that I wasn't alone, and so all those years of unnecessary shame and guilt. And I thought, so many wasted years. And I'm so grateful to Chief Bob Joseph, who's a friend of mine who I've known since the late 60s, early 70s. It's one of my earliest mentors, and got me involved in the reconciliation dialogues. So I started sharing, I started talking about what happened to me. It was really hard to do. I was still going through lots of emotions. And I was kind of like an emotional roller coaster. And I went into the Rotten Lake Treatment Center to support one of my daughters. Turned out that I was the one that ended up benefiting from that treatment center, because I finally dealt with the residential school issue. And I didn't go there for the alcohol. I was there to support my daughter for the alcohol abuse. But with the psychiatrist, we started doing the tapping exercise. And every time that we went through it, I would just start crying. I'd just tap, 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 and every time I got to my mouth, I would just break down and cry. So it took a few sessions for me to be able not to cry. And I was there for a few months, and I come home and started I was wanting to go for my doctorate. It was actually my dad that said, Lillian, you got to start doing some work on yourself. You can't carry all that stuff when you're studying. And so finally it's okay. And so I did start the process. And I found out that I was diagnosed with PTSD. I didn't know what it was. And I was having panic attacks. And that's when I was dealing with all the residential school stuff and the rape issues. And I was a mess. I didn't realize it at the time. Unfortunately, I wasn't drinking. I'm a workaholic, but I did go into depression. And really tough depression. And so now today, when my friends, canoe family friends from Alaska, I asked her to do a little butterfly because I support, I'm an advocate for missing, murdered, Indigenous women, violence against women. So, and the butterfly symbolized that we're butterflies in spirit with our loved ones. And I had her put a semicolon in there to say that I chose life. So that's a constant reminder of my past and how far I've come. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of therapy, counseling, psychiatric. Yeah, I went through it all. So it was, some of it was interesting and some of it was really good. But what really pulled me together was the tribal journeys, the canoe. You're familiar with the gathering of canoes, and so I do the tribal journey every year. We paddle for the last 10 years, so we paddle every day for 6 to 12 hours a day. So, and then we do a lot of cultural activity on a daily basis when we're on that canoe journey. So I started doing a lot of healing work then. But it wasn't until the Reconciliation Week that I really started healing my journey. When the gathering of canoes came into Vancouver, it was kind of an interesting moment for me because for the first time I felt welcomed in the city of Vancouver. Even though I'm Indigenous, I still felt like, I'm in somebody else's territory, so not really fully comfortable. And when the 3 local First Nations welcomed us, it was like, wow. And I finally felt comfortable about living in Vancouver, working in Vancouver, playing in Vancouver, crying, laughing in Vancouver, and I just felt at home here after that. So that meant a lot to me. And when we were, my cousin William Wasson sang a song. At the time, I didn't know it was a healing song. He explained it later. But when he started singing that song, I just burst into tears, and my whole body just fell. And I just started crying for my mom and dad, for my family. And I thought about the flashbacks of the residential school. It was just pictures going before me, and I just cried and cried and cried. And I thought, now it's time to just let go, just let this go. So, and I prayed and prayed, and I just finally took a deep, deep, deep breath, and I released a lot of that, and I smiled. I said, yay! And then we went to the forum at the P&E, and my younger daughter was with me. I was going to be fading the registration area. So she said, Mom, let's go over there and see what that's all about. And I said, okay, sure. So we went there. She said, are you going to register? I said, no, I've already shared my story. So are you sure about that? I said, yeah. She says, don't you think it would be helpful? And I says, okay, I'll just do it one-on-one and give my testimony to one of the commissioners. And she said, that doesn't sound like you. And so I said, well, okay, let's go. I said, I'm not ready for this. So we left, and I looked at her, and the expression on her face was kind of puzzled. says, okay, Shay, when I do give my testimony, will you be there? She said, yeah. So I went back and I registered for the full scale forum. Hundreds of people in there. So I did. And I think that was the beginning of really a forgiveness for me, to begin that forgiveness process for the men who violated me, for the men who sexually assaulted me or raped me. And I ran into Commissioner Wilson about 10 minutes after the forum, and there was a number of us that shared the story in front of a few hundred people and shared our stories. And she looked at me and she got tears in her eyes and she just said, "I believe you." And and I said, "That's all I wanted to hear. That's all I wanted to hear." And a government official to say that, because the adjudication committee rejected my application for compensation that they had put out there. It was my dad that asked me to do that, so I could deal with the stuff before going to further studies. But it affected me. During that time, I just shrunk a lot. And so it was a real battle for me to keep my confidence up, to keep morale up. When she said that, of course I cried. I said, "Thank you." So that was another turning point for me, a big turning point for me. And then the reconciliation walk happened. And that was another major part of my healing, when I saw all the people there supporting survivors of residential school, supporting intergenerational survivors. That just meant so much to me, to know that my father was there, to know that there were thousands of residential school students there, and to know what they went through, and that I wasn't alone. So it was really, so that's a kind of in a nutshell, my story. And one of the other big turning points for me was, I was at that time working for the Vancouver Aboriginal Community Policing Centre. And so I did a lot of work with the Vancouver Police Department and developed a really good relationship with them. And Ricola Valley started the Cultural Diversity Training Project. So me and 3 other men were invited to give presentations for twice a week for 3 months. And that was the hardest thing for me to do when I first started. I walked in a room full of officers, 25 to 30 of them, all in uniform, majority of them in uniform, and I just, my tummy was upset, I was nervous, my legs were shaky, and I was sweating, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. He said, "Of course you can do this, I'll be standing with you." And so I did my first sharing with them, talked about my residential school experience, and so after each, and I told them right off, I says, "You know what, I never thought I'd end up being in a room full of police officers sharing my story, because there was a time when I really hated police officers, living in Vancouver and seeing what happened to so many of our people. And now I know that there have been changes, but I'm still nervous because I still see you in the uniform and see what it's not you personally that reminds me, it's your uniform when I'm talking about the residential school, how as residential school survivors we're afraid of authority. People in uniform, people in police clothes, people in doctors' clothes, people in nurses' dresses, people in habits, Christian habits, dress wear, doctors, lawyers, you name it, we're afraid of authority. And my confidence always yo-yoed with people in authority. There's always this fear, and fear of being patronized, fear of the racism, just fear of being ignored, fear of being not seen. Just so many stuff we go through. So I shared that with them, and then as each session went by, I'd share a bit more, and I'd find, stuff that we experienced commonly as residential school survivors. So eventually, I think it was in my second month that I was okay with sharing my story, but also addressing some of the issues of violence against women, the missing Indigenous women, the racism towards Indigenous people from institutionalized racism. So they really, really helped me. And then it was through this work with the Vancouver Police Department that I also saw the human side of the officers. That they understood me when I talked about post-traumatic stress disorder as frontline workers. Many of them go through that. So I learned a lot in that process. So and now I'll switch over to, so that's my personal story and the story of so many thousands of people. And mine is from women's perspective. I think men have their own perspectives, and they need to come to grips with that, because that's the violence, vicious cycles of violence in our community stems from that. As many, many women were addressing it, but for some reason the men are really slow in going through that healing journey. So it's kind of perpetuating this misogyny, patriarchy, family breakdown, family dysfunction, various forms of addictions, you name it, we have in our community. Now we're in a better place. Many of us have begun the healing journey. We have many successful people, doctors, lawyers, nurses, artists, performers, in the sports world, for many forms of profession at the professional level. And even though I was a dropout, my daughters always encouraged me to go to school. You're such a role model, you're so inspiring, you're so smart. Why don't you just go for your master's? Because I was getting up there in age, and it was getting hard to find a job in the man's world, in Indigenous politics. So it's okay. So I did go when I was 54. I got my master's degree when I was 57. And so that was my first certificate ever. I worked hard for it. And so now my name is up for a doctorate, honorary doctorate. So, whether that happens or not, at least I know that my program, sees me as an honorary doctorate. And so now I've been involved with the City of Vancouver, with the Indigenous Aboriginal, in fact, Urban Aboriginal Peoples Advisory Committee. I'm reaching my 8th year there as co-chair of the committee. The co-chair with me is Stephen Eastman. That's how I know Jill. And thank you for standing with me and sitting with me. So when we first started, before, I'm going to just be really blunt and honest. When NPA was in, Indigenous peoples were not on the radar screen anywhere. There was no relationship with Indigenous people, Aboriginal people. COPE was a kind of, but in a very limited way. There was no real partnerships. So when Vision Vancouver came into leadership, Mayor Robertson's brother, Patrick, and I, he was in my cohort, or I was in his cohort, so we graduated from the same year, and we kind of adopted each other as brother and sister. So I knew that when Gregor decided to run, I knew right away, so I just walked over to Vision and became a really active volunteer. And I was embraced right away with the people who were organizing. And I wasn't seen as a token Indigenous person. it was my involvement wasn't limited just to volunteering by phoning. I was invited to all kinds of social functions, social events, so I got to learn really a whole lot about civic politics, and I was quite fascinated with it. So it was a really big learning curve for me in the city. It's my first time being involved in the city because my work was related to First Nations around the province. So I had learned a lot about urban Indigenous peoples' issues in the city, much similar to community ones. So when Vision Vancouver came into leadership with a Vision team, they set up the Urban Aboriginal People Advisory Committee in 2010, and then it was established in 2011 rather, recommended in 2010. And so I put my name forward. There was 12 of us at the time. We go through a screening, and a dozen of us were selected from all walks of life. And the council decides to approve or not approve the applicant. So I was really fortunate. I was one of the successful applicants. I've been there ever since. And in my UBC days, I was a Canadian history, Canadian political science major. And I thought, if I'm going to learn about a government I hate, so I had to learn about the Canadian system because they're worst enemies. So I took political science and Canadian history and found it really fascinating. I was just fascinated with the development of Canada. So I have these two thoughts in my mind. One is the colonial history, the colonial impacts, the historical trauma caused by all these policies and establishment of Canada. And then on the other hand, learning about the history of Canada from a student perspective, and being really fascinated with all the different people coming in from different parts of the world for different reasons, some as refugees, some as getting away from the oppression in their communities, so it was really a learning. I loved it. So we, in our first year, and Jill can attest to this, we had no idea what we were doing. We didn't have Ginger Cosnell at the time to guide us through. So we were all very new in civic politics. So we didn't know what we were doing in the first year. I'll be very honest about that. In the second year, something started clicking. We started asking more questions. We were asking staff to provide more information. There was a core group of us that just dove in and started learning about the city. But the turning point for us, it was when Reconciliation met with us at City Hall. And Chief Bobby Joe and his daughter Karen were there. And he and I were sitting opposite each other. Him as the chair of the Reconciliation, me as the co-chair of the committee. And he looks at me, he says, Lillian, he says, who would have thought, remember in 1972 when we were sitting in the Gate DC meeting, who would have thought we would be sitting in City Hall in Vancouver today talking about reconciliation? He said, yeah, that's so true. So I think about that time and how far we've come in the last, since was it 2012, 1 year after we were there. So in that meeting, we looked at three things. One, Vancouver was going to have a week of, it's a day or a week of recognizing Indigenous peoples. And we said we would like a year of recognition. So that was the first on a resolution. And two is to make Vancouver City of Reconciliation. And three, for the City Council to recognize, acknowledge the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And so we really learned a lot about the process after that. We just said, wow. So some of us made a presentation to City Council in support of Councillor Reimer, presenting it to Council for consideration. We didn't expect a majority. We didn't expect consensus on the issue. We thought that it would be just a vision support. And turns out it was unanimous support. So we were so happy. We were really quite tearful about it. In fact, we were ecstatic about it because it meant not a difference just to us, but to civic leaders in terms of what can be done in the city. So of course it's a long process when you're going through the resolution process and implementing. And me having been in politics as a coach of my tribal council for a few years, I understood how long it would take to implement a resolution and to identify the action items and to actually put them, make it a living motion or a resolution. So after the meeting, there was a summit of the municipal leaders, some of the institutions, local First Nations, Indigenous leaders in the city, where we identified a number of key recommendations to consider for making Vancouver City for reconciliation. So we had a whole list and we narrowed it down to, I don't remember, 25, I think it was, as our working. And then I learned that we do what's doable first, because people think of Vancouver City Council has a lot of money, and that's not true at all. So there's pockets. It's like any infrastructure, political infrastructure. The sewage, they have all that money for that. And there's a social program. There's the policies. So something we had to learn really fast, and we learned really early that we do what's doable. And our intention was to really lay a foundation for making Vancouver City for reconciliation. So any party that comes in after our main support, Vision Vancouver, is, if for some reason they're not elected, that another party can't just come and tear it apart, throw it out, as most parties usually do when it comes to Indigenous issues. So So we were very involved with City Council in the Reconciliation Week and Jill, you can speak to some of the, or I'll ask if you could speak to some of the Parks Board initiatives, and Vancouver School Board, and the Vancouver Police Department to a degree. We initiated a huge surge of activity and projects around the city. A lot of people don't know it, and it's just because individual people took the initiative, but it is happening. And I think we went through some of it in our meetings. So a lot is happening. Some people out there think that there's nothing happening as usual, but we know the people who are on the ground and working on it that there are things happening such as this. So what's happening here? So we got that rolling, and our biggest task was, okay, how do we make Vancouver City for reconciliation? And when we were having this discussion amongst ourselves, we realized that Indigenous peoples are not the only people oppressed. That there's also other ethnic groups, oppressed groups that have their stories about their arrival to Canada, and that they need to go through some form of reconciliation process with that historical impacts on their communities. We also have the LGBTQ community, people who are disabled, that they're part of a very, very important part of this process in terms of reconciling with the past. So, and the whole idea is to make healthier communities based on not equality but equity. Looking at the racism that exists, the systemic racism that exists in the health system and education system, with the big businesses, the corporations, the social services. So much systemic racism that our Indigenous peoples continue to fall through the cracks. So we're inundated with huge issues on a daily basis, We have the political land issues, we have economic issues, we have health issues, education issues, child and welfare, suicide, missing women, violence against women. Every topic that you can think of, our leaders are addressing that. So it gets very draining, very tiring. And then to top it all off, there's so much misogyny now in our communities, just because it's been adopted, or leaders have adopted Western ways. So now we're at a point where we are saying that, you know, we have to truth and reconciliation, say, calls to action. People can follow, people can identify, like we went through that process of City Hall, with Parks Board, with Education, with the Vancouver Police Department. Parts of the health system are going through it. I'm now working with the Public Health Service Authority 2 days a week with the SANIA's Cultural Safety Training framework training. So we deal with systemic race head on with the health authorities and staff, doctors, nurses, social workers. And it's a big, scary topic because they don't like to talk about that. And yet the majority of our people are dying in the health system right now. You know, and it's just really, really quite sad, the level of racism that exists. So we used to be afraid to say it, speak it. I used to be afraid to say white. I used to be afraid to say racism. I used to be afraid to say prejudice. But we face it on a daily basis. I'm always reminded by one of the women in one of our workshops. And she grew up in a kind of a privileged setting. She's half Native, half white. And so anybody who is born into the half white, half Native, if they're not, don't pick up the darker color or the Indian features, Indigenous features, they can pass. First thing we do is look at the color of her skin. Will I be able to pass? Oh, I can't pass. My daughter, second daughter, is just borderline. In the winter she can almost pass. Summer, no way. So we have a lot of people in that situation. And so we have some people who, earlier in 10, 20 years ago, who denied their Indigenous identity, just so they could be in a safe environment. But now we have a lot more people coming and sharing their, I am Indigenous, especially in the health system. So we're really working hard on that, and they're very involved in the reconciliation process. It's I think making Vancouver City of Reconciliation is a big challenge. People ask, what does it mean? You know, and quite often we say, well, first of all, for me, I had to reconcile with myself. I was dumping on myself for most of my life. And when I realized that, I had to realize that I had to do a lot of self-forgiving. I had to forgive myself for being so mean to myself, you know, for living up to other people's image of me, you know. So that was pretty painful. It's really, really hard for me to look in the mirror. And there were different suicidal points at some point. There was excessive drinking at some points. There was in my life, I couldn't settle down with a guy. There were just far too many issues. So in the relationship, and I vowed never to be in an abusive relationship. So anytime I start feeling that, every time I experience physical, emotional abuse, it's over. I'm not staying here. So I've lived up to that, and sadly, my partner, my younger daughter's dad, he and I got along really well. He was 10 years my junior, and he and I very, very compatible. We had long talks. He called himself a feminist, and which is something that not too many Indigenous men say. And I still miss him. And I thought, it's not gonna. So I chose to go solo after that. I can't put my energy into making a relationship work when I have so much passion in working with people, working in building partnerships, working in helping people, not only non-Indigenous peoples, but our people, understand why there's such a need for change. So that's really what I'm committed to, involved in, and I'm very involved with the missing murdered women issue. I belong to the Butterflies and Spirit Dance Group, and we do a lot of performances where all of us are family members of the missing and murdered women. And in 1979, two of my aunts were brutally murdered on the road between Gold River and Campbell River. One was stabbed over 50 times, the other stabbed over 30 times. And that completely destroyed our family relationship. We couldn't talk about it. We couldn't talk about it. It was just too much. And they were younger than me. And my Aunt Christine was my best friend. And after that, I was afraid to develop a solid friendship with anybody, just fear of loss. So anytime I'm getting real close to someone, I learned to push away real fast, real quickly. And so I am married to my work, I guess one could say. And it can get lonely at times. But I'm really fortunate that I have my family, and I have a lot of friends who get me through the rough times. And you just get so tired, just when is it gonna stop? When are they gonna stop murdering our Indigenous women? When are we gonna stop being targets? It's just so sad because we're just dumped into the rivers, dumped into the garbage bins. Last week I went home to Port Alberni, not home, but Nuu-chah-nulth home territory. We were in a family gathering, February 2016. It was put on by the province, and I was on the advisory committee, me and a number of other women, and so we prepared for 300 families to be there, family members, and there was 500 people that showed up in Prince George. And I was able to get my brother, cousin, my late aunt's son to Prince George, and he was so grateful because he started finally starting his healing journey, and he was only about 3, and was 2.5 when his mother was murdered. So that was a real healing journey for so many families. So there was 12 families from Nuu-chah-nulth who were in Prince George, and that's a lot. I thought, so I told our president, we really need to have a follow-up meeting at home. And there's so many, I know that there's other families who should be here. So she made a commitment, so we had that meeting in Port Alberni last week. And there was over 20 candles that were lit for missing and murdered women, just from our Nuu-chah-nulth communities. And that's not even all. There was a lot of families that didn't come. And so it was really a very powerful gathering. Again, a lot of my family members didn't want to go, they were scared. We did manage to convince my uncle, who was a year older than me, to be there. So my uncle and I were there on behalf of his sister, my aunt, his sisters, my aunts. And the over 20 families that shared, the majority have said that was the first time they spoke ever about their murdered loved ones or their missing loved ones. And it was streamlined, it was seen all over, it was live streamed globally. And I was amazed at them for sharing their stories about what happened. Some of them were very graphic. And so it was just like gut-wrenching. It was like, oh my God, you know, and I've been hearing these stories like for 3 years now. It's like, it was almost too much for me. I thought, my God, how do we carry this pain? And so we, our leadership, and coming from the Nuu-chah-nulth, I know how very focused we are on protocol and ceremony. So ceremony was a really big part of that 3-day event. So again, I went through my healing journey again there, and my uncle, I was a spokesperson for our family, and I asked my uncle to come stand with me when I was sharing my story and our story, and I was used to doing this alone, so it was nice to have family there. And I said, okay, Uncle, you want to say something? He just looked at me. He said, no. I said, I think it's time. He said, okay. He's never spoken before in public ever, not even at home. So he took a big, deep breath, and then he started, and he just broke down and cried, just cried. He didn't fall down or anything. He was just, tears were just pouring down his face, and I was hyperventilating. So, but he did manage to talk about his sisters and how it impacted him and the family. So I was really, really proud of him, and many family members did that. And that to me was a sign of healing within the families. It was wonderful to see families who hadn't been together like for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, not talking to each other, sitting there together, comforting each other. And that's how powerful the ceremonies were. And I thought that I had to go deal with the pain inside me over the loss of a favorite cousin, female cousin. When I was 12, she was so badly beaten that she didn't make it. And my mom, and they called my mom, and my mom took me, and I saw her. Her eyes were just popped and closed. It was completely black and blue. And I never forgot that. That's when I was about 12 years old, and that's when I decided violence is unacceptable in my life. So I always remembered her. And so that memory of hers has what kept me going, and determination to address the issue of violence against women, gender violence. And her brother was there, and I was so happy he was there, and he asked me to speak on the family's behalf. And so it was a lot of healing that took place, and that's a thing a message I've been wanting to get to people around the inquiry. Yes, we've got people calling for an inquiry, but my question to our people is, are we ready? I break down every time I'm interviewed with the news, with CBC. I break down if I have to do a presentation. Imagine doing that to a government official, you know. So we really need to, and the message, not just me, but others, is that we really need to prepare ourselves mentally, physically, and emotionally for these hearings, because it's so triggering. And it's mentioned in our gathering that it's the first time many families spoke about it for the first time. So they need to go through that process. So now, of course, we had so much support. It was incredible. And that's a message that we kept delivering to the national inquiries. It's got to be family-run, family-driven, family-focused, with support not just from our Indigenous community, but from the Western health supporters. We need both of them because we live in two worlds. We're not this, we're not that. We're diverse people, you know, just on and on and on, you know. We're as diverse as the rest of the people in the world in our Indigenous communities, you know. But we do have similar values and teachings, and that's what we want to develop. The foundation of the national inquiry is create that safety for people to address the issues of violence against women and against children. So a lot of healing, and that's in the Indigenous community that we're there. A couple of people noted that we're going through reconciliation here with our families, you know. So, and that's not just true for the Indigenous family. It's true for many, many families in the city, in urban areas, or rural areas. There's a lot of family breakdown. There's a lot of separation. A lot of social issues. I think Vancouver, Canada is it's a hidden topic. Violence, gender violence is a hidden topic. Politicians do not want to address. You know, let's face it. We do have a political world where there's men there who are very misogynistic. There's no place for women. And we do have the patriarchy system that's in place where there's no equity in the systems, you know. And equality doesn't cut it, you know. So that, to me, that's what reconciliation is all about, is rebuilding our families, rebuilding our communities. In Vancouver, we have such diverse communities that we're all the more richer for it because we can collaborate. And that's what I love about arts and culture. With the dance group I belong to, we do that. And there's a lot more people who want to do collaborative work. At the meeting last week, there was one of the women, she's an Indigenous woman, used to be in dance when she was in, wants to work in the community. She says, Lillian, can you help me put together a dance workshop? You know, just we would love to have one, you know, and because expressing selves through movement is so, so powerful. You know, we, for YOSA, we just did a fundraising for the Uplifting Indigenous Families Fund on Saturday night. We also collaborate with a Filipino group, dance group. So the Filipino dance group was going to fundraise for another organization. She says, I heard you started one. I said, oh, yeah. In November, 2 years ago, or a year ago, we had a meeting on violence against women, a workshop here in Vancouver by the province. And the Mowachaht campaign reps were there, David and somebody else, and they invited us to a Canucks game. So with complimentary tickets. So I was like, sure, that'd be great. So and there's 25 of us that were accepted, family members of missing women. And we get to the arena, or I get to the arena, there's not many people around, so I saw Brenda, who's from the interior, and she's got a sign, so we're holding the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women sign. So hundreds of people are walking by and seeing our sign. And this one man, he just looked over at us, and he was standing here watching us, and he was holding his hands, and he turned around kind of brusquely, and he just started walking up to us. And we just, oh no, and it's, you know, it's kind of be confrontational, it's going to be friendly. No idea, because he looked so serious. He was probably just as apprehensive as we were. And he comes up to us, he says, excuse me, if you don't mind my interrupting, but I really want to thank you for the work you're doing on this issue. Because it's such a sad issue. There's more work needs to be done on it. It just breaks my heart. So he was talking for a while, and I wish I could help, but the only way I can help is by giving you $50 to support. And I looked at Brenda, but we don't have an account, we don't have an organization. And so he said, I want you to take the money. He said, give me the money. I said, okay, here's an example. I said, Brenda was coming from the interior, was just talking to me about not having enough money to get back home because she was down for an event on the missing and murdered women. We run into that all the time. So here, Brenda, take this and to help you get back home. So we said thank you. She did take a picture of him and got his email address. So and I went upstairs, or we went upstairs, and Stuart Edison from France City was up there. And so he sat with me, and I was just sitting here just thinking about, we've got to get a fund happening here. And he sat down and he looked at me, and I said, a lot on my mind. And I said, Stuart, I said, do you know what? I said, we don't have an account. He said, and I told him what happened outside. He said, you need an account. Said, can you help us? He said, sure. And I said, okay. He says, when can we meet? He said, whenever you're ready. I said, okay, how about if we meet on Monday? He said, sure. And then so a couple of weeks later, we pulled together a team of 12 people, or actually 8 people that came together, had a discussion. And then in the second month, we had 15 people in an advisor group, and we had a couple organizations, the BC Nurses, or the BC Women's Hospital, and the Native Court Workers Association. So they're coming on board, and we asked them if they would distribute the money on our behalf. Our council, our advisory council, would set the criteria. Van City sets a fund, or Van City Foundation works with Van City to set up a fund. Native Court Workers distributes a fund. We set the criteria. So we had that set up within 3 months. It was like, wow. So now we're just at the point where we need to promote it. So our first fundraiser was on Saturday. So I have no idea how much we raised, but it's and then we've had like 9 families requesting for travel monies. And so we had to kind of say, can you just hold? You know, just wait till we put it into motion. So so the province has also invited us to presentations so that their public services from different departments can donate to the Uplifting Indigenous Family Fund. So the idea there is to support the families during the national inquiry with transportation and emergency accommodation, mainly transportation accommodation if necessary. And then after that, the post-inquiry, we're looking at wellness programs, whether it's arts related, and that's like what the Nuu-chah-nulth were asking. As I talked to the president, so that could be a model for, you know, how we set the criteria of the different forms of healing, whether it's through contemporary dance, wellness workshops, traditional dance, whatever the community chooses. And we have enough people on our advisory committee who are from all walks of life, so that can assist in that process. So that's where we are with and I'm really grateful to the Parks Board for opening the doors, or the community centers. We, as Indigenous peoples, even though we have the Friendship Center, there's a big fee now to get into the center. So it doesn't work well for us anymore because most of our people live at the poverty level. And we say culture saves lives. So it's really hard for us to find arts and cultural activities. And so I've been working closely with Jill and the community centers and helping some of our groups to get to place. For example, the Butterflies in Spirit now have a place that they can go to practice professionally, whereas before they took work on really hard floors and they get injured a lot. So they're really, really grateful for that, and it's really improved their morale, and it's really opened the doors for us because of that confidence that's now kind of coming through the group. So different things like that. So the partnerships are really, really important in terms of creating opportunities, looking at activities, projects, initiatives where you can do collaborative work, and it can be fun. I've certainly been really enjoying myself with the committee, with the city, and our most recent success was the Drums Calling Festival. It was just amazing. We had over 700 entertainers from an Indigenous community. And one of the other things that I've been encouraging people to do to show that reconciliation in action is to have collaborative groups, Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups, to show that people are working together. So that's all up for discussion, and the biggest request for it was to have it again next year. It won't be the 9 days. It was way too long for us, so we'll probably cut it down to 3 or 4. It was very, very successful, very successful. We had over 40,000 people go through the festival. So if it were 10 or 20, we would probably have said, we got to figure out how we can work around this and get more people involved. But obviously there's a lot of interest in the city of Vancouver, a lot of exciting initiatives. The Reconciliation Walk, Kyla's going to be talking about that. I sit on one of their committees in preparation for it. Very different from the first walk. There's going to be more activities that Kyla will talk about. So now I'm just going to, I'm starting to ramble, so I'm going to ask for questions. If anybody has any questions.
Congratulations. What would be your advice to encouraging in a community outside of Vancouver where there isn't a committee at the city or any of those early steps that you took to start to seek opportunity or embrace opportunities that we might want to offer?
Well, more recently, I think with the Vancouver is really setting in motion more communities around, not only around the province, but across the country to get involved in the reconciliation process. Port Alberni recently established a committee, reconciliation committee, to work with City Council. So that's a first. And Port Alberni is actually quite a racist community, so I was really surprised but really happy to hear that. I think that is to encourage the civic leaders in the communities to get involved somehow, even if it's really small scale, even if it's having an awareness workshop, and to, if at all possible, to bring in people from the Indigenous community as to why it's important, and if there's no one there, we have examples around in the Vancouver area with Ginger and members of our committee, a lot of the reconciliation team. So it's, and I think that we do have a foundation that we can work from, our basis we can work from, that's calls to action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Excuse me. So we have that in place that people can look at as a guideline or figure out where they can fit in. And one of the things that we went through in Vancouver was to Bobby Joe and his team, and the way in growing up, I was very aware of protocol, the importance of protocol, and that's key. If you can get that established, it takes you a long way. It just opens the doors. So. Did you have a question?
I do. Thank you for sharing your story and speaking about your experience and also speaking to some of the things that you're currently pursuing. I was wondering if you had a personal point of view about the inquiry, the status of the inquiry. Or I keep hearing on CBC when I'm washing the dishes about delays and problems and changes. I'm wondering what you feel about that, or anything along that line.
I think in BC we have taken a different, we have come from a different perspective from the rest of the country. Fortunately we have the people who are really involved in the downtown east side on the topic of missing women. We also have the Highway of Tears. So one area that wasn't covered was Vancouver Island in the southern interior, where there is a high number, with like 21 families were in Port Alberni last week and addressing the issue for the first time. So when we And it was really, unfortunately, it was really focused on Vancouver. Vancouver took the lead because they've been involved in it for, they've been the ones calling for it for a number of, over 20 years. So the focus was on that. It wasn't a provincial, that's my personal observation perspective. And I always come, I shouldn't say always, but I came from the perspective was that it doesn't only affect Vancouver. It affects the entire province, it affects the whole country, and you know, we cannot isolate it. And so the idea of having it family driven was a really good organizing tool, because that prevented organizations from taking the lead on it, and they want to lead. They want to do the formal presentations. We're saying, no, it's not about organizations, it's about families. So we had a meeting at the City Hall because I sit on a committee, I was representing Vancouver at the coalition, which represents over 80 organizations. And we have about 24 that are really active with the coalition on missing murdered women. So through the City Council, our committee and staff, we finally organized a meeting with the coalition. I said, what do you want? And because I sit on the coalition, I know what they want. So I was wearing two hats there, and so I really urged the women to, as you have a voice here, now's your time to say what you want. So they did identify some of the needs. So we took that information, and I know when to stay out of politics because I was in it for so long, so I just pulled back and just wore my committee hat. So this is how we can support. So we finally had a meeting in April of the organizations who provide service to Indigenous families. And we invited 80 organizations. There's about 60 organizations that showed up, or close to 60. And a lot of them are non-Indigenous organizations who have some staff. So it's a real mix of people. So we had no idea how that was going to go. We thought, okay, you wanted this meeting. We're here. And we said, we want to make sure that there's an Indigenous voice here, you know, because it was mostly the status managers, higher ups were non-Indigenous. So they brought some non-Indigenous people with them. And there were some organizations that were Indigenous organizations. So I've kind of become known to set the tone. So I went to that meeting, and I was one of the speakers from our committee. So I addressed some of those issues really discreetly. And there was a group of people that we were warned that were going to disrupt the meeting. And the biggest issue that we had from our community was that the national inquiry is not amounting to anything. And so as we can't focus on that. And we had discussions around it that we need to focus on what works best for us in the province. We need to forget about the rest of the country right now. We need to focus on Vancouver and BC. So that, and me and other speakers spoke about the hearing, and then we broke into workshops. And then it was run very efficiently. The organizing team did a wonderful job in getting feedback from all of the participants. As it turned out, it was about half and half Indigenous, half non-Indigenous. So, and again, you saw people working together. It's like, yes, you can have. And the people who were going to, who were resisting involvement by the city and organizations ended up helping us in the meeting. It was wonderful to see. And they were taking notes, and they were presenting on behalf of their working group. So it became very powerful in that as a community-based recommendations for how we approach the inquiry in Vancouver. So it's okay now, we're going to do the best we can with what we have and work around it. So we set the first of all, family driven, it's got to be a safe environment, there's got to be protocol, respect, there has to be ceremony. And last week in Pearl Bruni, that was a perfect example of what, and the Yellowknife hearing was a perfect example of what we're talking about. So in BC, we're just kind of focused on our areas, and the Commission is now, they're responding to requests, rather than arbitrarily setting up their places that they're going to hold hearings. That our family members are happy to hear that it's by invitation, and we're more comfortable when it comes to like groups like the Nuu-chah-nulth. We're inviting the Commission. We're preparing our people. We know what to expect, So Kwakwaka'wakw also are interested in having something similar happen, and the Prince George area and the Prince Rupert area they're pretty well organized, around the Highway of Tears, and in the interior, just because there's not been so much organization, there really hasn't been any organization in the South Island as well. The Nuu-chah-nulth just finally started addressing the issue in this past year. So in some ways, some families aren't ready. In other ways, families are. So it's not going to be over when the national inquiry is over. Those families and their respective tribes who make use of the inquiry will go a long way, as we just can't bitch and complain. It's otherwise we're defeating our purpose. We've been calling for an inquiry for 25 years, and we're saying we're not happy with you. We're not happy with the way it's going. You're not going to get anywhere if we continue to do this. So we had to figure out, okay, how do we make it work for us? So that's really where we're at in BC, I think. And we have in BC we have 2 people who are very involved in the issue, working as liaisons. Three people, very active, very involved in the issue, and they were totally opposed to the inquiry 6 months ago. Now they're working really hard. They understand what we've been saying now. So a lot of times our Indigenous peoples aren't familiar with political and government infrastructure. So it's very foreign, So, and that's why I took politics science history. So, and that has really helped me. And people who work, there are a lot of apprentices with the province now too. So we have teams of people who are willing to help out any way that they can. We had to do our own public education awareness in our own communities because of the fear around addressing the issue of gender violence, because we have some of our leaders who are offenders or perpetrators. We can't get around that. But that's our issue, that's ours to deal with. But we also have a large majority of women who are murdered in Vancouver or go missing in Vancouver in the urban settings on the highways, or they're hitchhiking. 2 of my aunts who were murdered were hitchhiking home. And that's that part of it is Indigenous women continue to be targeted. We have women who are dressed in suits, being approached by men, assuming that they're in the sex trade. I've faced that so many times in the city, and I'm constantly reminding my girls, be careful wherever you are, of not being dragged into a car or being approached. Just be firm with them, say no, and especially if there's drugs or money involved. And that's one of the ways that the men who are involved in that, or women who are involved in that, lure them with money and clothing, drugs, So it's not just women in the sex trade who are targeted. It's women from all walks of life. I would have been the statistic. Most of the women in our dance group are survivors. None of us are in the sex trade. So it's a very complex issue. And it's been there since the ports were established. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of the abductions continue to take place. Is there any more questions? One of the things I encourage people is that, tragic as it is, hard as it is, sad as we are, painful as it is, we need to celebrate. We need to celebrate. We can't live in this darkness. It's way too gut-wrenching, and the soul can get shattered if there's no light, if there's no celebration. So that's why arts and culture is so incredibly important. That's why our culture, my saving factor is my own culture. I'm so glad that it's part of me. But I say, if I weren't born into Aboriginal politics, I would have been a choreographer.
Well, I just want to thank you so much, Lillian, for coming and being so courageous and sharing your truth, your story with us. It means a lot. And I can't tell you how grateful we are. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is I work with Reconciliation Canada. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. And Lillian, thank you so much for everything that you shared. I was only able to catch the final portion of you sharing your story, but thank you so much. And Lillian and I have been sending emails throughout the year, and it's the first time I actually get to meet Lillian, so this is cool. Lillian is a huge supporter and has been doing so much work at the city level and is also on the advisory committee for a very large event that I'm here to invite you all to today. First though, I'll give you a brief background on the organization, the reason for this event that I'm about to invite you to, and then I'll tell you a bit more details about the event itself. So Reconciliation Canada, we are an Indigenous-led organization. We really pride ourselves on that. Our staff, we're very multicultural. Myself, I'm non-Indigenous. My colleagues from Squamish Nation. I have another colleague who's of Asian descent. We're a real mixture. And this really speaks to the vision of the gentleman, Chief Robert Joseph, who Lillian made reference to. He's a gentleman who's from Kwakwaka'wakw First Nation, and that's around Alert Bay. And essentially, he started this organization. It started as an initiative, really, back in 2013, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was coming through the province. There was a group of leaders, and Lillian, I'm sure you had a very important role to play in that as well, who wanted to put on an initiative that would engage Canadians as a whole to feel like they could be part of this very important movement of reconciliation. So in 2013, there was a walk that took place. There were several events that took place leading up to this walk as well. But the big event was this walk. And it was held in September in 2013, and it was a cold, wet, rainy day. Were any of, just by show of hands, were any of you guys there in 2013? Awesome. Thank you. So cold, wet, rainy day, and as some of you may recall, So we were hoping for, you know, thousands, a couple thousand to come out, but it was such a wet, rainy day, we weren't sure. And in the end, 70,000 people showed up. 70,000 people showed up downtown Vancouver. Martin Luther King's daughter was our keynote speaker, who spoke about the work that her father did and the work that needs to be done in Canada. And the group of organizers were completely blown away. And hence the organization Reconciliation Canada then started full swing. So our work is really around raising awareness about reconciliation, trying to unpack that term through workshops and speaking engagements, trying to just help just raise awareness and education around that. Chief Robert Joseph is a residential school survivor himself. His daughters are part of our leadership team. And so we do workshops and speaking engagements and different initiatives, trying to take a pulse to see where are Canadians understanding, where are we at with reconciliation, and where are new ways forward for us to go. So that leads me to the invitation piece. We have a huge event coming up on Sunday, September 24th. We are bringing the walk back to Vancouver once more. So this walk is happening at 9:30 a.m. downtown, right here at Queen Elizabeth Plaza. And I would be thrilled if all of you guys would be able to join us. So 9:30 a.m. is when it begins at Queen Elizabeth Plaza. We're going to have a welcome and a prayer. We have, and I should mention actually just a bit more context, we have an advisory committee that Lillian sits on, as well as the local nations sit on, who have been very helpful in helping us craft and really make sure that we're doing this walk in a good way. So at 9:30 a.m. it's downtown, and then it's a 2-kilometer walk over the viaduct straight down Georgia Street, then on to Pryor, and we're going to finish in Strathcona Park, where we're doing something very special. We're going to be holding a Reconciliation Expo. So the walk, 9:30, but then once you get to the end, don't leave, because we're going to have this great big huge expo going on from 10:30 to 3 p.m. And essentially this is going to be our educational piece. We have designed the expo into quadrants. Everyone's going to come through the quadrant that we've deemed the past, where we have the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation that will be doing some educational components around residential schools. Then the following quadrant is going to be the present, where we're going to have our main stage with some excellent speakers and performances. We have National Chief Perry Bellegarde, who is going to be our keynote this year. And we're going to have performances, Indigenous performances, as well as many multicultural performances, always coming back to that idea of Chief Joseph's, that it takes everyone to be a part of this conversation. We're going to have a quadrant that's going to be focusing on the future, that's looking at youth. We're going to have some art projects going on. We're going to have a great big mural that's going to be taking place, which will be really neat. We're going to have lacrosse demonstrations. We have a charity called Right to Play that's coming out to do different sports as well, with youth as well. And then the final quadrant is Nuu-chah-nulth, which is the word you'll see on these postcards as well as on our posters, which means we are all one in Kwakwaka'wakw language, which is Chief Joseph's nation's language. And there we're going to have our community booths for organizations that are doing some great work on reconciliation. We're going to have artisans and food trucks. So that goes all the way till 3 p.m. So it's a full day, it's family friendly, everyone is welcome, and yeah, hope to see you guys out. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll pass these around, please take a chunk. And I saw that. May we pass those around too? I'll pass you. Yes, question.
Can I ask a question? Do you have any provisions for seniors? My mom's been asking me about the walk and wants to come with me, but she's a good walker, but 70,000 people is a lot of people. So I'm just sort of wondering if there's, I have some worries. So I'm just sort of, I told her I would ask.
Thank you. No, that's a great question. The way that the walk is being organized for our elders is essentially everyone is welcome to come at the 9:30 a.m. start. For elders, we're inviting them to walk half a block. our Indigenous elders to walk half a block, and then we have a shuttle bus bringing them to the end site. And alternatively, also coming directly to the end site is an option as well to be a part of all the festivities. That will be open as of 10:30 a.m. So you have those two options. Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions at all?
It's supposed to be sunny that day.
Yes!
We hope.
Fingers crossed, yes. I've been checking the weather lately. Refresh. Well, thank you so much to Brenda and your entire organization for having us and for being such huge supporters for this movement. So, yeah, thank you for your time.